Numbers chapter 13, verses 26 through 33. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country. And the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. But the man who had gone up with him said, we cannot attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak, come from the Nephilim. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them. Amen. You may wonder what's wrong with his voice. I've been dealing with this cold since last weekend. I made a joke with my youth kids. If it was COVID, I could have rested. But since it's not COVID, but I'm enjoying my voice. It sounds like I became a different person. And again, welcome here. For those of you who are not here during announcement, Joshua Kim, one of our youth students, is battling lymphoma cancer. So please pray for him. What we expose ourselves in our lives is pretty important, because the people we are hanging out with, spending time the most, or the media that we are watching, music that we are listening to, are often have huge impacts in our lives. Some people say if you watch violent videos constantly, it's not guaranteeing, but there's a higher chance of you becoming violent in the future. Similarly, if you're constantly witnessing and experiencing positive things in your life, you become more likely to do more good things in your future. For this reason, one of the things that we do as a very first step to treat, not necessarily the very first step, one of the steps as we treat the patients or clients who are dealing with addictions, one of the first things we do is help them to form a new friends group. If you read the book about poverty, one of the things that you have to do to overcome poverty is to surround yourself with a different people or different groups of people, because there's something we call peer pressures, and also friends that we are putting ourselves in also have huge impacts in our lives. And I think it is pretty true. If you are playing or hanging out with people around you, you are highly influenced. So if you talk to one of any drug addicts, if you ask what's the definition of good friends, they're gonna say friends who help them to find drugs for free or cheap. If you are talking to someone who is struggling with alcohol, they're gonna say people who are drinking with them will be good friends. At the same time, if you are asking some people who do some volunteer works, what's the definition of good friends for you? They will say people who are participating in volunteer works. If you're asking some Christians, most of them hopefully will say, will try to find their friends from the church or their religious institutions. Because friends and people we are surrounding ourselves are so important. It is so difficult that we are standing against or saying something against uh, the crowds or the majority. In Korea, I think about 20-ish years ago, there is a advertisement saying, when everyone is saying no, we say yes. When everyone is saying yes, we say no. If you do that in the reality, people will be laughing at you or you will be left out most likely. But we've been reading this and thinking about this verse over the last few weeks. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. This verse written by Paul and this word of God is specifically asking us to stand or do not follow the pattern of the world, which is being followed the majority of people around us. And I've been emphasizing this verse over and over because our worship is rooted in complete obedience to God. And then the fruit of complete obedience is to not conform the pattern of this world. So if we want to really worship God in our daily lives, if we want to stand as worshipers in our lives, there will be multiple fruits that we are going to see. One of the major fruits that we are going to see and witness and get from us is do not conform the pattern of the world. And then in the past weeks, I've shared some examples of people in the Bible who did not conform to the pattern of this world. The first person was Mary, who gave herself and who gave all she had to Jesus. After she experienced how great this Jesus is, how compassionate this Jesus is, and how loving this Jesus is. And also last week, I shared the example of Jesus who himself stood against and break all the norms of the society. And today we want to move on to another example of it. Before we move on to another example of how we can worship God daily by not conforming to the pattern of this world, I want to touch a little bit of the Korean old saying, 작심삼일, meaning 3 days of hard work, which means you make a decision to do something, or you set a resolution for the New Year's, but it doesn't last longer than 3 days. Do you agree with this? When I make a decision to change something, if it lasts 3 days, I'll be so proud of myself. Because oftentimes, let's say I'm not going to eat meats, I just break it in a few hours. If I say I'm not going to drink soda, I can please keep up with that. But if I don't drink coffee every day, I feel headache. I get migraine. I'm addicted to caffeine, honestly. So it's really hard to change our things, especially when you are making a decision. You can really hang on to that because it itself is pretty challenging. And what the Bible is asking us to do, when we say we want to follow Christ, there will be a moment that we have to decide whether we are following the pattern of the world, or whether we are following the Word of God. In today's society, everyone is pursuing success and higher or more powerful status. But as we are following the path of the Lord, sometimes we are forced to, or we met at the moment where we have to humble ourselves, and that we have to strive for sharing more with others other than storing more for our own goodness. And when we read the Bible, when we are encountering those moments, we often justify ourselves. Well, Jesus was able to give himself. Mary was able to give the pure nard, which was the worth of the 1 year salary during that time. And people were able to give their lives to God because they were special. They were people that in the Bible, they were historical figures. But what I want us to remember as we approach this, I want us to remember that they were just people next to us. That we are reading their stories in the Bible does not mean they were very special from the birth. They were not special. They were just people that we see every day, but they became special in the eyes of God because they were able to stand and follow the guidance that God has been providing for us. And that is something that is the ultimate goal we want to pursue as Christians. And another example that I want to share with you today is Joshua and Caleb. Let me give you a very brief background of them. For 400 years after Jacob and his family moved to Egypt, they became slaves later, and then Israelites were enslaved for 400 years in Egypt. During this time, slaves were treated as inanimate objects, and then Israelites suffered greatly. So they cried out to God during their hardship, and eventually God sent a human figure whose name was Moses to lead them out of Egypt. And after they moved out of Egypt, they started a journey, and their destination of this journey was the promised land called the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan is where the Israel is in today's days. During their journey, the Israelites faced multiple challenges. If you see the map here, this is the route that they were traveling. All these areas here, Sinai Peninsula, these are all the desert or the wilderness. One of the most common traits of the wilderness and desert is you cannot get enough water from here. Because there's not enough water, there's not enough grass or plants. Because there's no enough plants or grass, there's not enough animals. We, as the scholars assume, about 2 million people, they came out of Egypt. So even though the land is so big and huge on this map, they were not able to be fed. They were not able to have enough water. And during this time of journey, God every day, God provided manna to feed them and quail to prevent them from starvation. And also God provided water if they were thirsty. And right before today's passage, they finally got to this place here. Here, this is the land of Canaan, from here to up there. They finally arrived the promised land, and then that's when today's passage starts. Even though we say it's a promised land, it was not the land that was full of vacancy. The land was already occupied by the Canaanites. The Canaanites had a lot of different tribes in there. So what Israel people had to do, they had to conquer the promised land. If you know how the battles or military system works, they do not send the troops right away. The first thing to do, they send the scouts so that they can know how many soldiers are there, what type of weapons they have, how the land is formed, so what type of tactics they're going to use. In order for that, Moses, the leader of Israel, picked 12 people, one from each tribe, so that they can go out as spies to scout the land. Here we have to think about, he only picked one person from each tribe. If you want to be picked as a scout, as a spy to represent your tribe, you must have some types of talents. You must be trustworthy. You must be trained to pick as one of these spies. And then after they visit, they gave a report to Moses. They cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes, and this is what they say. They also reported that the land was inhabited by giants or strong warriors, and that the farming was well established. They are saying this land is decent. There are people, there are big people, giants, because they are eating great things. And then as we read in today's passage, there are two different reports about the same matter. 10 of them are saying, we cannot conquer this land, we should not start the battles. But Joshua and Caleb, they say, no, we are going to go, we have to go, and we have to start this battle. And then we want to focus on what made these people give two different reports. And as we think about it, and as we consider what different perspectives that these 12 spies had, I want us to think about what we should do as true worshipers. The number one thing I want us to learn from this passage is a worshiper recognizes and sees God's presence and power beyond their current circumstances. I didn't prepare the picture for this one, but one of the analogy that we often hear at school and in our life is a half cup analogy. Let's say there's a cup and there's a water is filled half. There are two ways we can look at this cup filled with water half. Some people may say the cup is only half full. Some people will say the cup is half full already, or I can drink a half cup of water. So as I said, it is important to be surrounded what type of people that we are surrounding ourselves. And also another thing that is important for us is how we see those people. And then a lot of events are happening in our lives. They are important at the same time. It is really important with what perspectives we are interpreting or we are seeing or we are processing the events and people around us. And then we see two different perspectives in today's passage. This is the first perspective. They gave Moses. So 10 spies gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us. It does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. So they are listing facts here. We see great land full of food. Then we see these people are living in this land. And then this is how they are, how they continue. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country. And the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. So if you continue to read, this response is pretty understandable. And then they are saying, we cannot start this battle because we know for sure we are going to lose this battle. Firstly, these 10 spies are focusing on the physicality of their current residents, and then they're also focusing on the fact that they are not trained soldiers. Think about it. You lived as slaves in Egypt for 400 years. For the slave, there's no way that you can have a pretty good, well-maintained nutrition. So you must be smaller, and you must be weaker, and you must be skinnier. However, people, they were born to beg already, and they are living in such a fruitful land, and then they are getting fed well, they are getting good nutrition, and they have been living pretty prosperous life here, but so now you are seeing two different groups of people who are having complete different physical conditions. Now, you've been slave for 400 years. There's no way that you have been receiving military training. On the other hand, these are the people who lived in this land for hundreds of years, and they've been trained to protect their lands. So what these spies are saying is pretty reasonable and logical. We are weak. We're not trained. Therefore, there's no way that we can win from this battle. On the other hand, in verse 30, I don't think I have it here. In verse 30, if you have the Bible, please open the verse 30. It says, Caleb says, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. They are saying this in a different perspective, but let's try to make it more personal. You have been selected out of 2 million people, at least 2 million people, and then your reports will decide the future of your nation. Let's make it a little bit smaller. Your reports is going to decide the future, the fate of your family. Now, if you are making a positive report about this battle, Moses will decide. People will prepare the battle, and then they will go into this land and start this conquest war. You are not trained. You are so weak, and then you are smaller and skinnier and weaker than these people. If I were in this situation, I will be with the 10th spy, because there's no way we can win from this battle. We oftentimes go through different trials in our lives. God oftentimes helps us to overcome our trials, but not too long after, like maybe just a little bit time after that first trial, sometimes we face with another trial. Then we begin to focus on the facts that we are struggling again, meaning we often forget how God has been leading us, how God has been guiding us up to this point. That's what the 10 spies were doing. God has been doing a lot of impossible things for them. God delivered them out of Egypt. God gave them manna. God was providing them proteins by giving them meat. God was giving them water from the desert. However, when they were facing with another trial in their time, they completely forgot what God has done for them. That is how we can live our life according to Romans chapter 12, verse 2. As we are living in the world, as we are staying in the world, it is inevitable for us to be surrounded by the patterns of this world. When we decide not to follow the pattern of this world, we will be challenged and tested, and then we will be tempted by the world. And then when we are getting tempted, tested, and challenged, what is really important is that we have to remember what God has done for us. The reason why we keep losing our everyday battle, the reason why we often fall, the reason why we are being tempted and then we are getting tempted over and over and over, and then we do not overcome the same temptations over and over and over again, is because we are not remembering what God has done for us. And there's another factor we have to remember. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. It's not a one-time thing in our lives. This is something that is going to happen over and over and over again. Do you know when a soldier is most vulnerable to defeat in a war? That is right after they win a long battle. In the military, there's a saying, if you lose a battle, you can be forgiven. But a soldier who lacks vigilance will not be excused. If you think you have done enough, that is the moment that we often fall, because we no longer remember what God has done for us. Leviticus chapter 11 verse 44 says this, I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourself, make yourself holy, and be holy because I am holy. Do not make yourselves unclean by any creature that moves along the ground. If we want to win the battle, we have to be holy every single moment, even when everything around us is so peaceful. And Paul even says in 1 Corinthians, so if you think you are standing firm, if you think you have achieved something in your life, if you think you have achieved peace and wholeness in your life, be careful that you do not fall. And the second thing we want to learn from today's passage is this. The power to tackle the world's challenges lies in the power of consistent prayer and quiet time with God. What made Joshua and Caleb different? What made them to have a very unique perspective that none of those 10 spies had? The answer can be found in Exodus chapter 33, verses 7 through 11. Now Moses used to take a tent, a pitch-in outside the camp some distance away, calling it in the tent of meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. And whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrances to their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance, while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshiped, each at the entrance to their tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. So up to this point, the Bible explains while Israel people were living in the wilderness, they built a tabernacle. They built a mobile temple. So whenever they wanted to meet God, they wanted to seek God's plan, God's will, they went to the temple, they gave us sacrifices, and they asked for God's will. And then Moses was praying there, and then here's what the secret is coming from. Then Moses would return to the camp. So Moses is leaving the tent, but his young aide, Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. Even Moses, the leader of Israel people, left the tent to go back to his life. But Joshua stayed in the tent. When we go to spiritual retreats, or when we listen to some great, powerful sermons, or have a powerful worship experiences, we feel like great fire, passion. We make decisions to follow Christ, follow the Lord in our lives. But how long those decisions last? Not too long. When we go home, when we're going back to our daily life, when we're faced with the same temptations, same trials in our life, we often fall. Then the question is, how can we keep this passion, and how can we keep these seeds that God has planted in us to grow, so that we can become like Joshua and Caleb in the passage, so that we can become like Mary, who was able to giving all she had, and so that we can become like Jesus that we are trying to become like. It is by prayer and having a constant prayer time with Him, and having a quiet time with Him. How many times and how long do you spend with God in your daily lives? How much intimate time do you have with God in your daily lives? Or how easy do you give up your quality time with God? We can imitate religious practices. We can come to worship every week. We can give thousands and millions of dollars of offering to God. We can go and do a lot of volunteer works. But we cannot fake our spiritual power. And then the true self, our true spiritual self, our true spiritual reality is revealed when we are facing a trial in our lives. How can we live a victorious life? It's by when we are having calm days, when we are having peaceful days, we do not skip, but we value this quality time with God. As I said in the beginning, the 12 spies were people who were respected, who are known to be intelligent, who are known to be trustworthy. That is why Moses picked them. Yes, they may be able to fake their ability or their spiritual status in the eyes of people. However, when they faced the trial, and even today we see who they truly were. And in 2023, I want us to be able to live victorious life in our daily lives. I hope we can overcome the trials and temptations that often made us fall. So from next week, we're going to talk about more about prayer and quiet time, because that is a secret that we can have a victorious life. And guys, as we live this week, let's remember, do not give up or compromise on the time you set aside to pray and communicate with God. When you do that once, nothing is going to happen. But days later, months later, you will see yourself how far you've got away from God. So as we go out today and live this week, I hope through consistent prayer and having personal, intimate time, quality time with God in our daily lives, we may be able to keep the seeds and let it grow and let it bear fruits in our daily life, so that we can see the world differently as God sees the world. Amen.